Episode 200. I cannot believe we are here. I'm super excited for you guys to listen to this episode. And this is actually, initially this podcast episode was hosted on Teri Fisher's podcast, Voice First Health. And I have a really amazing announcement to make about this episode. So essentially, myself and Dr. Neel Desai worked on a book chapter in this amazing book called Voice Technology in Healthcare, Leveraging Voice to Enhance Patient and Provider Experiences. And we wrote the chapter on the power of voice in Western medical education. So that book is coming out March 10th. And it's going to be awesome to have this big compilation of lots of physicians and authors who are talking about how voice technology is going to impact healthcare. So really excited for you guys to listen to that. And this conversation, Dr. Teri Fisher interviews us about our chapter and things we learned about voice technology and how it's going to impact medical education and beyond. So I hope you guys enjoy this 200th episode of the Happy Doc. And have a great one, guys. And if you enjoy the episode, please share this with one of your friends. And if you haven't already, please leave us a 5-star review on your podcasting platform of choice. It helps us so much. And I'll see you on the next one. Take care.
All right. Well, it is an absolute pleasure to have two awesome guys on the podcast. We've got Dr. Neel Desai and Dr. Taylor Brana. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Woohoo! We did it. We're here.
Hey, yes.
All right. You guys are all around great guys, as I said. I've had a chance. It seems like I've known you guys forever, but really it's only been like a year and a half now.
Right.
We've been to so many events together and so on. And I'm really proud and happy to say that I know you guys. You're great guys. And we're going to get into all the cool stuff that you're doing. But first, we got to learn a little bit about who you are. So let's start with you, Neel. Neel, can you take a moment or two and introduce yourself, who you are, your background, and your story?
Sure, thanks. So what's up, listeners? Dr. Neel Desai. I'm a family doctor just outside of Cincinnati in Northern Kentucky. I've been a doctor for 20 years, and I'm also involved in medical education. I teach University of Cincinnati, University of Kentucky medical students, first and second years, and as well as I'm part of the Happy Doc podcast with Taylor. And one last thing is I have a son with a congenital condition called osteogenesis imperfecta. So it's a physical disability. So I advocate for that community as well.
And
all right, thanks very much. Yeah, go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah, and I'm Taylor, and I'm a psychiatry resident in my third year. There's so much I could talk about. I have a background in gymnastics. I grew up in California. Now I'm here in Philadelphia. And I just have a passion for education. I love helping people. That's why I went into medicine in the first place. And, Neel and I kind of stumbled on a lot of stuff together. But one of the things that we work on is something called the Happy Doc podcast. And it really came out of a place of frustration and noticing there's a lot of burnout in medicine and depression. And I'm honestly looking for my own happiness, my own fulfillment. And through that, we kind of created a lot more and looked out to reach out to great mentors and people who were doing amazing things in medicine. And that progressed to what we're going to talk about, I'm sure, today, which is all about voice technology and how that's going to be a way to improve fulfillment, happiness, education, and having the ability to learn in a different way. So that's why I'm here, and I'm really excited to talk.
Yeah, that's a great intro to, like you said, so many different things that we can talk about. I want to say right off the bat that these two guys, Dr. Desai, Dr. Brana, you guys are both chapter contributors to the book that's about to be launched, Voice Technology in Healthcare. Really, really appreciative of that. And an incredible chapter where you guys bring your expertise now in medical education at that intersection with voice technology. And we're going to get into all that because I'd love to hear your take on just that, the education and how it intersects with voice. But maybe we can even take a step back and talk about, like, how did you get interested in voice, or what do you see as the value in voice? Why are you in this space? Taylor, you want to take a stab at that one first?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it happened really naturally, right? Because if you think about, first off, like the podcast community and where we're heading in general, you think about how we're so strapped for time. You know, it's so difficult to balance working out, going to work, having a family life, educating yourself, staying on top of the news, all of these things. And the one thing about podcasting, which I loved right away, is it bridged the gap of, doing stuff like driving or walking or getting somewhere, but also being able to assimilate information. So that's where podcasting became just such a time win, where you could enrich your experience during those passive gaps. And then, so that's where podcasting kind of came up, and why I listen to podcasts in general. And voice is obviously an extension of that. And so when, Neel and I were learning more through the podcasting and reaching out to different people, obviously learning through people like Gary Vaynerchuk and all these other entrepreneurs, we start to learn more and more about voice technology and what it could do. And again, it's just voice to me, in the, looking at it from kind of just the time perspective, it's podcast plus. I mean, you're imagining a world of the future where you're able to interact with that voice experience in a way that is under your control. It's just so powerful. So it's an obvious progression for me when I heard about it initially. It's an obvious progression into, what we need to be thinking about and how this is going to impact education and beyond.
Perfect. And Neel, what's your take on this? How did you first become interested in voice, and how did you get involved in this space?
So we actually got, even before, I think it was 2016, that my wife bought some of these speakers. I won't say the name, ALX. I don't want to trigger anyone's device, but you know what I'm talking about, Lexi.
Yeah.
So, and we were just, it's something that she just bought. It was something that we had in the home. And then something I noticed, it was just something one day, my son, he was just kind of doing a quiz. We're just, kind of putzing around on it. He was doing a quiz. It was asking him some state capitals. And it kind of dawned on me, because it kind of was this intersection of frustration with technology at work. We've talked about the electronic health record, the failure of that hype, and this being a possible solution to that. And in that intersection, what Taylor and I were doing is and my own personal frustration and journey from doing my medical training in the late 20th century, early 21st century, I realized that, there's been a transition of this technology from screens, or from even before screens, it became screens primary first. Mm-hmm. And then this kind of insight was that, wait a second, I think this could be an area where we could go what you talk about, going to voice first and interactive voice first, so that we can get away from the screens. And what Taylor and I talk about is getting our lives back, so we can connect with each other meaningfully and with our colleagues and our communities, and take better care of our mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health and our careers. And that's kind of what got me excited and got me into this space to go deeper, and then get involved with the community, reach out to you and everyone that's in the community, and kind of learn more about it and see what we can do to contribute, especially and with my perspective in being in medical education for a while and being a physician for 20 years.
Sure. No, that's great. So that's a great segue into the education and the chapter that you guys wrote, because now you guys really are on the forefront here of what's being done for education, healthcare, and voice technology. So I'll leave this open to either of you who wants to start here, but I'm curious now to just learn a little bit about the thought process and how you feel about education, the future of education in voice, and maybe a little bit about some of your thoughts of what you captured in the chapter in the book.
So I guess I'll start. When you just, first off, education in general, I want to take a step back here. There's nothing, there's nothing scary about us moving on to voice. It's always been a vocal way that we teach. Teaching happens through the five senses, and it happens through that transmission of literally what you're thinking in your brain, transmitting it, and it going out to someone else. That's the oral tradition. And if you think about medicine or any sort of education in general, it's always been an apprenticeship, and there's always been the oral part where you're taking that knowledge and you're transmitting it to someone. So if you just think about it from the basic kind of understanding of that transmission, using technology to now using things like the internet, these voice platforms, all of that, it's, again, like I said earlier, it's just such a natural progression, right? So I don't think it's something that we need to be afraid of. And I'm sure we can talk about the things that are scary about it, but it's just something that, we want to understand so we can use it to the best of our capacity, right? So now we're entering this future where, these platforms, these ambient systems that you can access information from are here right now, right? And how do we look at that in the present moment? And how do we look at that at a possible future? And that's kind of what we focused on in the chapter mainly, is where are we now and where are we heading? So if you think about like the Mayo Clinic has a skill currently that's available that essentially is a general repository of information that you can access this skill and ask it a medical question, and it'll give you solid information about, let's say, if you sprained an ankle or you injured, you had like a little muscle spasm or tearing sensation. You can ask it a question to try to understand that more. And isn't that crazy that you could be running outside, you get a muscle spasm, you come back in your house and you immediately access your device and ask it a question. And it might tell you things to look out for in order for you to know if this is more serious or if maybe you'll be fine, And that's just a crazy example and a realistic example of something you can already do, right? With that being said, and something we talk about a lot, and there's so many aspects of this. Again, this is a book's worth of information, hence why there's a book about it. And I'm being serious about it, is the fact that with that piece of information, there's a lot of things to tease out. Is the person asking the effective question? Is the person is the person getting the accurate information from a credible source? Is that information and how they heard it translated by the person in an effective manner that they can use properly? There's so many things to tease out from a legal perspective and how the person's going to use information, all of that stuff. But with that being said, the reality is here. It's already here. The Mayo Clinic they've done a great job using that skill as an example. But how we're educating, people is incredibly important. Specifically for medical education, when we talk about with students, we talk about that aspect of it. There's just so much opportunity, like we talked about, to take this ambient sort of, life that we have when we're entering. Let's say we just left the classroom, we come home, and we want to be able to lounge on the couch and rest our eyes. All of these students are reading books, they're staring at computer screens, and they're sitting in chairs. And if you think about them spending, possibly 8 to 12 to 15 hours of the day in these positions and, staring at screens and having all of that light and information entering their brains, the one thing that they're not using as much is just voice. So that's the big thing that we want to really hone in on, is this is a modality that students are often not using because it's always, or in general, it's a lecture style memorization sort of method that we have right now, where we're sitting in a classroom, we're staring at a PowerPoint, we're listening to the lecture, but we're not interactively using our minds, we're not interactively speaking, we're not interactively testing, and we're using voice. And that's also a benefit I talk about as well. And we can talk about the things that are considerations on the negative side, but the benefit is, like we talk about this a lot, is you can sit on your couch, you can be in a bathtub, you can walk on a treadmill, you can be walking outside, and you can still use an interface that has nothing to do with the screen in order to test information. And so that's the aspects, the positive benefits of it. There's so much we can tease out and talk about in this, but I just say that, in general, those are some of the things and concepts that we want to let people know about.
Perfect. And Neel, so, you together with Taylor, you have really tackled this in a very concrete way for medical students. So can you share a little bit about what you guys have done, what you've created, and how that's helping the education now of this generation?
Yeah, so based on what Taylor was just saying, what he was explaining with being screen first, all those problems, the problems that we're solving is allowing students to be mobile and allowing them to be kind of healthy, as well as study using their voice. So based on that problem, what we did is we created an interactive digital flashcards called FlashGo. It's a question bank that allows students to just use their voice to be tested. And it frees them up to be mobile. So it's pretty straightforward. It's interactive. You can use it. You're just, walking around your house or like you were saying in your bed or whatever, just being mobile. So that was kind of the idea, is that kind of practicing what we preach, like getting active, being mobile, being healthy, and being able to study at the same time. And then also the other thing is, this is also going to pioneer the way for new ways of learning, because this is the dawn of the new era of voice. Over the last, one thing that we learned in our kind of writing about this, just insights for us, was that, for me especially, that the standardization, like all these standardized exams became digitalized and it became screen first. And basically it did the research. It was basically like the late 20th century, early 20th or 21st century, around 2004, all these standardized tests started going to the computer. So then all the resources and online resource question banks became computerized screen first. We're trying to get back. We're trying to take away from go into this new era of making it voice kind of first, and just kind of, and then also pioneer research for how do people learn now that they're speaking and using their voice. What part of the brain are they using? How are they learning? And just from anecdotal things, I know it's not evidence, but just talking to people, they're saying they're remembering things quicker, and they're improving their academic performance, and it just seems more streamlined, and they're remembering more. And it's exciting to see the early signs are there that people are learning better and they're healthier. That's what we want.
Yeah, it's interesting because it makes me think about even at a really early age with my son, who's in junior high school, and so we're in Canada, so they take French, and there's vocabulary that he has to learn, and so sometimes he'll be like, "Hey, can you practice my vocabulary with me?" So basically, what I'm doing is it's as if I'm acting as flashcards for him, right? I'm throwing out the words, and he's throwing out the words to me, and he's telling me what the word is in English, or vice versa, or we'll go French, English, French, whatever it is, and knowing what you guys have created, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this is like FlashGo, but for French or whatever it is.
Right. Exactly.
So, comments on that, Taylor?
I mean, it even enters a weirder space, because if you can imagine a future which is going to converge lots of technologies at once, I mean, could you imagine a future where the voice is now terrified? Not terrified.
You're very clear. My son's like, no, not that voice again.
I know, but so you could imagine a future where you could literally say, I want Samuel L. Jackson to teach me medical questions, and you could, you know what I mean? And so with all the biomarkers and all, I mean, again, we can get into the weeds here in a possible future, but you could imagine a future where, like we were talking about, this technology 10, 15, 20 years down the road is not only going to be multiple choice. It's not only going to be free form questions where you're answering questions in a pretty basic manner. It might be able to tell not only how confident you are, but how well you understand. First, are you getting the question right? Does it check? Could it check your reasoning as to why you arrived to that answer? Is it possible that it notices your ability to look at information in a way that is synthesizing current information and maybe applying that information in new ways? I mean, I don't know where this technology is going to go. Right now, at its very basic form, it's like you talked about. It's like a flashcard. You say A through D, or you give a short answer. Like FlashGo right now, there's a question that talks about, what's the most likely substance that this individual's using when they come in with chest pain? And you say cocaine. It understands that, initial answer, right? That answer, it can capture the word. But the future is going to be very interesting if we figure out ways to check for reasoning and understanding. And like you said, I mean, that's basically what technology is going to replace. Your son's going to be able to use the technology, and you're not going to have to test things. So
and also what you're saying, Taylor, the other thing, Terry, is picture this, where you can create a skill to just put it in your voice, personalization. So a couple of things is personalization of these skills, especially not just for education, but also Taylor was talking about the Mayo Clinic. What happens when Taylor makes a skill for psychiatry and someone's dealing with some psychiatric issue, and it's a trusted source for his patients? It's in his voice.
In my
How about
voice.
Terry? In his voice, hey, Taylor, I'm dealing with insecurity and anxiety and not feeling good enough. What do I do? And you'll have that comfort of Taylor's voice telling you, your physician or nurse or whoever that you know and trust, So building trust is a big thing. Teri, someone injures their, like, ruptures their Achilles tendon or something. What do I do? Teri will tell you, like, it's in Teri's voice. And it's, because you know that person, you've already built that trust. I think that's a big thing because trust is in short supply these days. So if we can build that trust, especially in all these experiences, whether it's education or care, I think that is going to help with that convergence and pulling things forward and adoption of all these things we're talking about.
That makes me think of, education, not just for the medical student or for the trainee, but educating the patient as well.
Yes.
And so, I mean, you're right. I believe in this very, very strongly as well, that a lot of what we do as healthcare providers is educating the patients. And so I think what you're getting at there is that it extends beyond just educating the trainee, but also the patient, which is very exciting to me. Very, very exciting. Yeah. So can you maybe just give us a couple more? Are you able to give us a couple more concrete examples of the way FlashGo would work, or some of the other types of questions? Does it cover all aspects of medicine right now? How are you structuring that?
Yeah, so FlashGo is actually just the first product we've officially released now. We're also doing, just for everyone to know, we're also doing dental FlashGo currently and MCAT FlashGo. But, again, medical flashcards on the go right now, FlashGo is specifically for medical students. And the most daunting and scary part of medical school is passing boards. And so right now it's focused on the Step 1 USMLE and Step 1 COMLEX exam for the DOs out there. And essentially it's for those med students that are studying for this exam. Right now it has 2,100 questions that have been fully edited and cleaned up. And the plan is to go, if you guys aren't aware, there's 3 main exams in medical school. Step 1, the plan is to go Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, and also shelf exams. And shelf exams are for, when you're doing clinical rotations. That's how it works in the US at least. On top of that, with all of those questions, it's going to be a huge database, probably like 10,000 plus questions in the end. But what FlashGo does currently is these questions are categorized and they're also subcategorized. So for example, and it's not perfect, we're still working on it, but for example, you could say cardiology, and let's say you want to specifically look at myocardial infarction or heart attack questions. You could technically say cardiology, then you would say MI or heart attack, and it would call up those questions. And so that's what it can do currently. And again, that's not perfect. So you can categorize this huge database of questions into specific areas you want to study. Now, the questions specifically at this moment in time, you can essentially do random or those category questions, and you'll be asked a short question, and it'll either be multiple choice or free form. And if it's a multiple choice question, you'll have the option to answer A through D. And if it's free form, you're going to have to use your brain, and you're going to have to come up with the answer within a few seconds. If you don't come up with the answer, it's going to repeat. It'll ask you to, check in and see what the answer is. And otherwise, you're going to get an incorrect answer. So it really is forcing you to really recall, that information, which is completely different than anything else. And, there's still some parts to it we're trying to figure out, tease out. There's options to repeat the question. There's options to go to the previous question. There's options to go to the next question. And we're still trying to, one thing that, as you will realize, is because it's a vocal answering and vocal navigation system, there's some challenges to the menu of options that you need to figure out, right, in order to navigate the system. But with all that being said, that's what it can do currently.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Neel, are there plans, or have you thought about, or have you had discussions about actually using this as part of like a medical school curriculum from the medical school side?
I don't think we've had that formal discussion just yet, but I could see it being part of a curriculum at some point in the future. I think part of it's just getting the data early to kind of see how students are responding to it, and then kind of getting that feedback. I think our big thing is just collecting the data. How are people using it? What are they using? What do they like, don't like? And then once we understand that, I think we can kind of go to the schools and do that.
And just to address that a little bit, so at this point, we've talked to a couple of schools. I actually had the opportunity to speak to a local school a week and a half ago. And the thing with all of this technology is that whole session where I spoke to this administrator at the school, because we want to do this right. We're seeking permission to speak to the schools in order to talk about the technology. That whole session was essentially all about all the negative things that could happen with us giving it to the school. I basically was not, I wouldn't use the word berated, but I was I had to sit down and answer 10 to 20 questions. And there were a lot of concerns that came up. I mean, one of the concerns was students are already bombarded with all of this stuff. How are you going to tell us that this is going to help improve time and decrease stress and all that stuff when you're adding on another resource? So I had to kind of comment on a lot of these concerns and questions about all of that stuff. But I think there's just that learning curve, because the first natural response to a lot of this stuff when implementing, a very conservative foundation, as you know, Teri, and as you know, Neel, of course, they're all nodding, is, medicine is, typically conservative. So when you're talking about the stuff, the initial response is fear. And it's really about, talking about things in a logical and conscientious manner, how to do that. So to go back to the initial question you asked about, implementing it from the school curriculum, I think the answer is it's an absolute fantastic idea. And I think it's going to be about, first not infiltrating, but first getting through the mental barrier in people's minds about this technology, which is why things like this book and information and conferencing and all that stuff will help with that. But
yeah, I think a lot of it's also, Teri, I actually heard this I overheard this at last year's voice conference, and someone said when they were trying to talk to hospitals to implement, they're like, no, they're not interested. They want to see it work first. And I think that's the mentality, is like, they want to see that it's working before. They don't want to be the first to do it and have anything go wrong. So they're like, they want to see that it's working and that there's data that it's showing that it's worked before they'll be like, sign on to be like, all right, let's see this.
And that sounds, like a very typical response from healthcare providers who, like Taylor was saying, tend to be conservative bunch. And so I think, what you guys are doing and just getting out there and putting the content out there and collecting data and essentially like trialing it with students is probably the most strategic way, I think, to do that. I think you guys are definitely on the right track with that. So that's amazing. Just with a couple minutes left here, I'd love for you guys also to comment on the Happy Doc podcast, because this is a really interesting concept that you guys are doing. And I think it's a really, really needed area that is not often talked about in medicine. So Taylor, do you want to just comment a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so the big challenge right now, and even though I talk about burnout and depression and exhaustion in medicine, it's happening everywhere, right? So I don't want to make it just specific to medicine per se, but when you're trying to get somewhere, or when you're going through a journey, as a medical student, or if you're in pre-med, for me, I'll just talk about myself. I was entering this journey and everyone was telling me how hard it was, how difficult it is to be a doctor. I'm reading all these articles about depression and exhaustion. And yes, you can be bombarded with that information, but during that journey, if you want to do it successfully, if you want to do it well, you want to learn from examples and you want to learn from people that are doing it well and maintaining a sense of fulfillment, well-being, excitement, all that stuff. So there's a lot of focus, like we're talking about fear and negativity and anxiety. There's all this focus on that. And I wanted to create that compilation of strong mentors, excited people in the field, people that were passionate, people that are looking forward to waking up in the morning and have those examples. But, in the podcast, I want to understand why, what is it inside of them that is letting them do that? Why are they doing this? How are they operating on a daily basis? So it's that compilation and that resource, really selfishly for myself, to regain my sense of happiness, fulfillment, and excitement. And I'll tell you, through the process of interviewing, I am much happier, more fulfilled. I feel more in control of my ability to operate. And I want that to be what this podcast is passing on awesome knowledge, inspiring ideas that are thought-provoking, and help you be that fulfilled doc or happy doc, or happy professional that you are. So that was kind of, the big overarching goal of it all.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, I love that concept. And I encourage anybody who is looking at being more happy and fulfilled, which is probably everybody, to check out the podcast because it's a really great one. Well, guys, I want to thank you both for your contributions to the podcast, for your contributions to the book, for your contributions to medical education, for all the amazing stuff that you guys are doing. It's incredible. And I'm very fortunate to consider you guys my friends as well. So thank you for everything you're doing. And thank you so much for spending some time here on the podcast with myself and the listeners as well. Oh, and before I forget, guys, please share with the listeners where they can go and learn more about you guys and what you are doing. Taylor?
Yep, sure. So for the Happy Doc podcast, you can literally search the Happy Doc at any of the podcast channels you listen to podcasts on. And if you want to reach out to the social media on that, it's at Happy Doc Podcast. And then in terms of MedFlashGo, our website's www.medflashgo.com. And if you have I'll say Lexi, but you know what I'm talking about. If you have one of those that voice platform device, you can search up you can search MedFlashGo, all one word, and it'll come up.
Perfect. And Neel?
So Taylor pretty much told like the Happy Doc and MedFlashGo contact. For me, it's at lowercase drneel 1973. So at Dr. Neel 1973, Instagram, Twitter. And then that's all you'll find me.
Perfect. And I'll say that Neel's Twitter game is on point. We often joke that he is a bot because I don't know how he responds and is able to comment on, I think, just about every single tweet that I see that comes across my feed. So, so you gotta, anyway, this podcast does prove that he's not actually a bot. So way to go, Neel. Keep up the Twitter game.
We don't know about that.
All right. Well, again, thanks so much, guys, for being on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Later. Thanks.